I don't know.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Schweich, Missouri State Auditor. I'm thrilled to be here at Kimmswick. I'm going to talk to you about the results of the audit that we did. First thing I wanted to say is, there's some pretty serious adverse findings in this audit, and we have some things that need to be improved in the city. But when I come in and I talk about the finances and the way money and contracting is handled by an entity, that is not meant to be a reflection on the city as a whole. Kimmswick is very well known throughout Missouri. I'm the state auditor, I cover the whole state. The restaurants you have, the history of it, the festivals you have are all very well known and much appreciated around the state. And what I want to start by saying is that I love this city. I've been here before. You have a really good city and a city you should be proud of. And our objective here, and I think the petitioners who petitioned me to do the audit, their objective was also to make sure that the finances and the contracting and the things that people don't see every day, which is all very beautiful, are handled really, really well. And so I'm here to be completely constructive, to talk to you about the problems we found, about the things that need to be improved about this city. But that's not to say anything about the Strawberry Festival or the Apple Butter Festival, all the great restaurants you have here, the places you have that people can sleep. And I mean, it really is a wonderful part of the state of Missouri, and it's a well-known part of the state of Missouri, considering how small the town actually is in terms of permanent residents. So I start by saying congratulations on having a real gem of a city here, and I really mean that. It's a really great place. That said, we want to make sure that the fiscal controls, the financial controls, meet the same quality as the city appears to tourists who come in from the outside, because you really do have a wonderful place. So everything I say is meant to be completely constructive, and some of the things I say might be a little harsh because there are definite improvements needed to the finances of the city. But I say that in the context of trying to make a really good place even better, and the city you should all be proud of. I want to introduce Spence Jackson, our media director. If anybody has any questions from the local papers and all, or there's some follow-up that has to occur, you can contact Spence. We have our audit manager, Carrie Wright, here. Where are you, Carrie? There's Carrie. And Stephen Ray, who is the auditor in charge out of our St. Louis office, who are here also, and they have all the details if there's any questions I can't answer. They, of course, have been living and breathing this audit and know all the details. What the structure of the meeting tonight is going to be is I'm going to go through the findings and the recommendations. I'll have time to answer a few questions, and then we also have our website that people can go to ask additional questions if you need to. That's www.auditor.mo.gov, actually moaudit@auditor.mo.gov. Now this is a petition audit. A lot of the audits I do as state auditor are required by law. I have to do the state treasurer every year. Other ones are the ones we decide to do. So for example, when we see a school district that's having some trouble, we might decide to go in there on our own. But Missouri is unique in the sense that it has a process by which citizens can actually ask the state auditor to come in. If you get the right number of signatures, we come in and do the audit. And when we get a petition audit, and I have 150 audits that I do every year, I say I, it's really them that do it, but I'm their leader. Of the 150 audits we do every year, about between 10 and 20 are petition audits. And that means the citizens took the time to ask us to do it. So we put them at the top of the list. They don't wait in line. We do those first. And so we consider them very, very important. Under state law, a city of this size needed 25% of the actual voters in the last governor's election. And that meant that we needed 30 signatures in the city. It's not a real big city. And we received 42 ballot signatures. And that activates the requirement then that we do the audit when we get the signatures. We generally audit, we focus on one fiscal year. We focus on the year 2013. But if we see problems that predate that, we'll look at that. If we see problems that are going into the current year, we will also look at that. But it's better from an audit perspective to focus on 1 year and see how that's going. So we focused on 2013. But we did look before and afterwards, and we do that when necessary. Now, we found 19 areas that needed fixing. That's findings and then sub-findings. We call it a finding when we find something that needs to be changed. So there was a lot that needed to be changed. What I'm going to do is just give you a summary of that. I do believe that the administration of the city is committed to improving and making the recommendations that we put in the audit. We did not get a lot of resistance, so I'm hopeful that after we leave, all these problems will be fixed. We generally will come back 90 to 120 days later to make sure everything's been fixed, and we will probably do that in this case. And we'll send a team out there to ensure it. I have a rating system I put in place when I became auditor 4 years ago. Every entity we audit either gets an excellent, good, a fair, or poor, which is kind of like in school, an A, B, a C, or a D. It's not real complicated. If you want to see the criteria by which we assign the grade, You can look on our website. We have very specific criteria for what it takes to get an excellent, a good, a fair, and a poor. We rated this city fair, which is like a C, basically. Not real good, but not the worst we've seen either. I mean, we didn't find any egregious criminal activity or things we see when we give somebody a poor. We just found areas that needed improvement. Fair means the audit indicates the entity needs to improve operations in several areas, and these require management's immediate attention. The first thing I want to talk about is the city festivals, and I have to tell you, I mean, I've never had to give an audit where I talked about a critique of festivals, and I'm not that comfortable doing it because I know y'all love the festivals, and we love them too, but you still need to run them right, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. We found significant weaknesses in the way that the two festivals, the Strawberry Festival, which I guess you all hold in June, I think that's the one I've been to, and the Apple Butter Festival held in October. We found significant improvements that needed to be done in the way those festivals are conducted. And that's not atypical of a festival, I guess, because people just want to go out and have fun and they don't think so much about the finances. But there's a lot of opportunity for mischief. I mean, festivals have a lot of cash coming in. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So therefore, they need to be done correctly. What we found was, first of all, there were significant problems in receiving and depositing, the way money is received and the way money is deposited. The controls over the procedures for receiving and depositing needed significant improvement. Let's talk about the festival receipts. The city did not maintain adequate records of the festival monies that were received. They did not issue pre-numbered receipt slip for booth rentals and sponsor fees and things like that. Normally, if you do that, you get a receipt, and then that can be tracked from an accounting perspective. That was not adequate. We found that the city clerk had not reconciled registration forms to fees deposited. So somebody registered, you know how much money they're supposed to get, then the money comes in. Normal accounting would be you'd account for those. You'd make sure that everybody that registered and paid a fee, that money was then accounted for. Because if it isn't, that means somebody could take it. Now, we didn't find any evidence of any theft, but we found controls that were loose enough on those fees that it could be stolen. And you don't want that to happen in the future. I mean, there was $109,000 deposited for 560 vendors just for the 2013 festival. That's a lot of money for a small city. That's $109,000. And there were not good financial controls over that money. We found the city did not track the city-operated booth sales or reconcile products sold and monies collected. So the city has its own booths, and we found there was about $22,000 deposited from those booths in 2013, and there was no effort to reconcile products sold and monies collected. So you sell a certain amount of products, you know how much those products cost, you should then be able to see, well, that's exactly how much money we should have as a result of that. That's accounting 101, and that was not done in the case of the festivals. And it's very important that be fixed because, again, it's mostly a cash operation. I suspect most people don't pay with a check, so it's very hard to track cash, and you need to have those procedures in place. And right now they're not in place, but we think they will be in place by next year. Deposits. The city does not deposit festival monies received intact or timely. They don't restrictively endorse checks upon receipt. That's another accounting problem. The city allows vendors to post-date checks for future festivals in order to secure their booth location. About 35% of the checks received for booth rental and sponsor fees were post-dated and held for up to 10 months. That's bad accounting. You don't post-date checks and you don't hold checks for 10 months. Both of those separately are bad things. They were being done together. This places monies at risk, increases the possibility somebody could steal money. It also means there might not be sufficient money by the time the check, you're trying to clear the check, the money might not be there. Apparently that's happened before. So we want to make sure that that is not a problem going forward. Security of receipts. Festival monies were not received and kept in a secure location. We observed unattended bank bags and monies unlocked in file cabinets. Keeping money locked, I mean, we're in a world where people take what they can get. If they see a bank bag lying there, you know what they're going to do? They're going to pick it up and grab it. If there's a file cabinet with money sitting in there, somebody knows it's in there, they're going to go in there and take it. I mean, I'd like to believe everybody's honest, but since I've been auditor, I've now found 33 public officials embezzling money. I'm not even talking about private, public officials embezzling money. It happens all the time. So you have to be very careful with what you do with your cash receipts, and that was not occurring. The security receipts was very, very poor. There was an issue in past festivals about who would be compensated and who wouldn't. There wasn't a clear policy. There's tax implications to that. There's IRS implications. My understanding is that going forward, nobody's going to be compensated. So that's probably the better way to do it. But if you are going to pay people, they would be called paid volunteers, which is kind of an oxymoron. If you're paid, you're not a volunteer. But there are all sorts of issues associated with paying people for working at these that were not being attended to. My understanding is the way you fix that is by simply having everybody be a volunteer, and that's fine. There was not documentation supported to support the compensation that was paid. That means there could be problems with reporting to the IRS and others if you're not documenting what you're paying to people. We had some issues over festival disbursements, payments that are made in connection with the festival. There's a purchasing policy the city has, which if you're going to buy something over $500, there have to be bids. You have to have competition. And we think that's very, very good. I mean, when you're going to purchase something expensive, you get multiple bids, you're going to get the best price. We found that for goods and services costing more than $5,000, there also has to be advertisements in the newspaper. So for $500, there has to be competition. For $5,000, you actually have to go the next step and actually advertise it. We found for that, for example, for the 2013 Apple Butter Festival, trash services, $2,646, no compensation. Portable toilets were over $5,000 under your own policies. That actually has to be advertised in the newspaper. That did not occur. The band promoter, $2,600. Now these might all be great vendors and great suppliers and maybe your friends, but you have a city policy that says there has to be competition and in some cases even advertising for that, and that did not occur here. So that was a clear violation of city policy, and that has to be fixed. The festival committee is responsible for obtaining bids and making recommendations to the board. The board is supposed to discuss and approve festival bids during meetings, but there's no documentation for any notation of any approval of any of these contracts. That has to be fixed because there has to be accountability to the citizens to make sure the money is being taken correctly. Documentation relative to those bids that do occur is maintained off-site by the festival committee chairperson. It should be available to the people who are there. Contracts, the city did not enter into a contract with the band solicitor or promoter or the beer vendor for the 2013 festivals. Paid about $4,800 to find and pay bands for both festivals. The city paid the beer vendor about $9,800. Again, did not have the kind of contracts that are required to ensure a proper account. Board approval. The board did not approve a large portion of the 2013 festival disbursements prior to payments being made. And the board's meeting minutes did not document the board's approval for festival disbursements. The board didn't hold meetings in May through July of 2013 for various reasons, yet still dispersed almost $30,000, which meant the proper procedures had not been followed in that particular case. And that's 41% of all the disbursements that were made were not made in accordance with proper policies and procedures. The city clerk anticipated that the 2013 Strawberry Festival disbursements and said they were anticipated, they were sort of pre-approved. Well, there wasn't good documentation of pre-approval. And by the way, pre-approval is not a good way to do things anyway. They should be approved in real time in accordance with the meeting. We said in the audit there's no documentation to support that. Back one thing. And I covered the lack of soliciting contracts that are required. Festival committee, there were some issues there. The festival committee did not comply with the Missouri Sunshine Law. You know what the Missouri Sunshine Law is. It means citizens should have access to what committees, public committees do, public boards and committees do. They should know what was said. And there's only very, very limited circumstances under which those things can be kept confidential, like sensitive personnel matters and the like. In this case, committee decisions are often made by phone, text, or email between the members. Open meetings are not held, and no minutes are prepared. That's a violation of Missouri Sunshine Law. That's a Missouri statute. Nobody goes to jail for that, but there are enforcement mechanisms the Attorney General could use. You wouldn't want to have to deal with a lawsuit from the Attorney General in the city. Our recommendations are that that be corrected. Sunshine Law is very important. You need to keep things open. You need to keep things transparent and available to the public. What we know is recommendations are made by the committee to the board, but these committee decisions are not always brought before the board for approval and recommendation. They're not always voted upon or approved. So that's multiple violations of the state sunshine law. Now, we always make recommendations. We don't just point out problems. And based on what I've told you, it's pretty obvious what the recommendations are going to be. First, ensure proper receipts and records are maintained and reconciled to the composition of deposits. The board should develop procedures to track and reconcile booth sales, particularly city booth sales, and monies collected. Ensure deposits are made in a timely and intact manner. That checks and money orders are restrictively endorsed upon receipt. Money is properly secured, not stored in crazy places where it can be stolen. The board should discontinue the practice of accepting post-dated checks. Any fees received in advance of upcoming festivals should be promptly deposited, not held on to. And booth assignments should be adequately tracked. The good news is everybody in the city said they're going to implement these. I think the practice of accepting post-dated checks can't be done this year because you've already accepted some post-dated checks, but it will be implemented next year where there will not be any post-dated checks accepted. We asked that there be a policy to address compensating festival workers. I understand the resolution was just not to compensate festival workers. That's fine. We asked that the city ensure it solicits and approves bids in accordance with their own city policy. And also the board should establish written contracts for festival services when needed. The city accepts the recommendation, and they will be implemented now, so that's good. You'll have everything formalized the way it should be. We recommend the city review and approve all festival disbursements prior to payment, and ensure approval of festival disbursements is properly documented in the meeting minutes in accordance with the Sunshine Law. The city said we will implement those changes. We also ask that public meetings are held and meeting minutes are prepared, approved, and maintained to the festival committee directly in accordance with the Missouri Sunshine Law. I know we've given you some guidance on that, and everybody's going to implement that now. So you should be, hopefully, going forward in full compliance with Missouri's open records or Sunshine Law. That's the first finding. That's probably the most significant finding. We also identified, this is finding number 2 in your audit, several weaknesses with the city's accounting controls and procedures. Now we're talking more generally, not just about the festivals. Our first finding is really related to festivals. We like to see what's called separation or segregation of duties and supervisory reviews. You shouldn't have one person in control of all the money. Now, in a small city, we can't usually afford to hire multiple people, so we ask that some sort of supervisor or separate person come in and make sure that not one person is in complete control of all the money of the city. The city clerk here performs many duties that in a larger city would be performed by a treasurer or a collector. We understand that you can't afford that here, but again, there still needs to be supervisory reviews, and I think there is some of that going on now. The city did not issue pre-numbered receipt slips or maintain records of slips for any disbursements that were made and any monies that were coming in. And the city did not deposit money timely or intact. Really what we're saying here is the same problems we found with the festivals apply to the city more broadly, and those need to be fixed. The city clerk doesn't maintain receipts for estate events in a secure location. They're put in a binder and left out in the open, and there were some problems with voided checks. They were destroyed. Normally what you do is you do what we call mutilation. What that really means is like having some stamp that says it's void that goes all the way through the check, so it can't be used or it can't be reconstituted. Rather than just destroy them, you should keep the mutilated copies of the voided checks, and we understand that that's going to be fixed. So our recommendations: segregate the duty of the city clerk. If you can't hire another employee, we understand that there should be what's called a documented review, and we understand that's going to occur going forward. Ensure proper receipts and records are maintained and reconciled to the composition of receipts. The city is implementing those as well. And then mutilate and retain all voided checks, and that will also be done going forward. Third finding relates to city's policies and procedures. The city's policies and procedures are not adequate to address board approvals, related parties, and IRS reporting. And believe me, the last thing you want is the IRS coming in. I'm an auditor. I do not audit taxes, but I certainly know a lot about the issue, and you don't want the IRS coming in and auditing Kimmswick. So that's why we're making these recommendations. First part of this finding is we found that the city had made several disbursements prior to obtaining board approval, and meeting minutes did not include documentation of disbursements approved by the board. That's a serious finding. It needs to be corrected. The board didn't hold any meetings, I think I mentioned this earlier, between May and July 2013, yet dispersed $23,000 from the general revenue, road, and event funds. That's not in accordance with proper practice and procedures. These should be done at monthly board meetings, and there was no documentation maintained to identify which disbursements were approved and when. Other problem we had was related parties. The city does not ensure that the payments made to relatives of city officials are free of conflicts of interest. Now, there are circumstances under which it's okay to have a relative, but there's getting money, but it has to be very clearly documented and done under proper circumstances, because you don't want allegations of nepotism or self-dealing or corruption to occur. In this case, we found that 4 relatives and the mayor got $2,400 in 2013 for work performed at city festivals. The city also paid $5,700 to 2 city employees who are related to board members. Now, these city employees were hired before the people were elected to the board, so we're not saying anything wrong occurred, but there needs to be a written city policy on conflict of interest. We can make sure the citizens are comfortable that this isn't self-dealing or handing out money to friends or relatives. That is not allowed, and you need to make sure it's all very carefully documented to prevent it, because it did happen in 6 cases where related parties received money from the city. And if it's going to, you're not going to have the trust of the citizens unless it's pursuant to a very clearly defined and well-executed conflicts of interest policy. There's some issues with the IRS I mentioned a minute ago. The city did not properly report payments to vendors or individuals to the IRS when required. They didn't report the mayor's stipend as compensation for tax purposes. I think that's like $200 a month. That needs to be reported. And they did not always file 1099 forms with the IRS as required. We identified payments to 9 individuals and 2 vendors totaling over $12,000 when these people, the city did not do that, not to the 1099 forms. Now, Section 6041 and 6050 of the Internal Revenue Code require non-wage and payments of at least $600 a year to be reported to the government on 1099. That did not occur in the case of 11 different entities. Look at the IRS's attention. Please correct that problem, because believe me, you think I'm bad. Wait till they're
It is.
So, good. So our recommendation is to review and approve all disbursements prior to payment, ensure the approval is properly documented. We understand the city will implement that, establish policies and procedures concerning related parties, and ensure that any decision concerning a related party is adequately documented and fully explained in the meeting minutes so that citizens can understand this is being done properly rather than improperly. We understand that's going to be done, and make sure you get your W-2 and 1099 forms in properly so you don't have the IRS on your case. That will be done as well. These are real issues. They need to be corrected. But the good news is it doesn't cost $1 million to do these. It's pretty easy to make take this corrective action, and it should be able to be done going forward. Our fourth finding relates to the Anheuser estate, which I have not visited actually, but I'd like to see it sometime. I've been reading a lot about it. City policies and procedures over disbursements, capital assets, and event profits need improvement in this area. I've read a lot about the Anheuser estate. It sounds kind of neat. But again, just because you have a gem doesn't mean you can't account for it correctly. You don't have to account for it correctly. We did find serious problems in that. First of all, the city does not retain documentation to support its approval of disbursements made from the trust fund that was established and help administer that estate. Both the mayor and the city clerk are responsible for signing all checks from the trust fund. When disbursements need to be made, the trust board provides the city with checks and supporting documentation for review and approval. That's what's supposed to happen. Meeting minutes do not specify, as far as we could tell, what disbursements were approved, and we were not able to find documentation as to what was approved and what was paid. So that's very important to fix that. We also found the trust board sends documentation to the city about every 6 months, but doesn't provide any assurance that disbursements were properly approved by the city. That needs to be fixed. The city has not conducted an inventory of the Anheuser estate. I suspect there's a lot of nice things in there. I don't know, but I suspect there are, thinking just from what I've read about it. Inventory is one of the most common problems we have in audits. It used to be inventory was like a podium, which no one's going to steal. Now when I do schools, inventory is like iPads and iPhones and things like that. That's really serious. I don't suspect that's a problem with the Anheuser estate, but I'll bet there's a lot of very valuable things in there. And I think it's very important to keep a very thorough inventory of what you've got, because I'm telling you, you want to trust everybody that walks in there, but I told you, I already found 33 public officials stealing money. I don't know how many people do it in the private sector. It's on the rise. I don't know if it's because we're coming out of a bad economic time or there's just a certain change in attitude, but there's a lot of people that have a take what you can get mentality. They see a nice antique there, they think they can slide it in, and they'll do it. It happens in ancient ruins in Europe, it happens in small cities in Missouri. So please be better keeping your inventory, keeping track of your inventory, tagging it, and doing an annual inventory. That has to be done to ensure the integrity of these things. Event profits. The city does not have a formal agreement with the Anheuser Trust Board outlining how income derived from events held in the Anheuser estate will be divided between the city and the trust board. I don't know, but I assume like there's weddings that occur there and things like that. Probably generates good income for the city. We need to know exactly how, there needs to be a written agreement on how that money will be distributed, whether it's for upkeep of the estate, whether some goes to the city. All that needs to be formally determined and written down and taken care of. I know the state and the city, we also looked at the meeting minutes, and there appears to be nothing at least in writing about that, although I think some people said there was an informal arrangement. It needs to be formalized. I understand you've had 44 events there since July 2013 and collected over $15,000, so it sounds like it's a good revenue generator for you, and it needs to stay that way. But again, the people and the citizens who wanted this audit are entitled to an accounting of where that money went and how it was dispersed. And my understanding, again, is the city is implementing all of our recommendations relative to the Anheuser estate. And I think that you're going to at least try to, I don't know, you haven't entered into a written agreement yet, right? But you're working toward that. We think that's very important. A little more on the Sunshine Law. The city is not always in compliance with the closed meeting provisions of the Sunshine Law as well. Prior to November 2013, city officials did not prepare closed meeting minutes, date, time, board members' attendance, topics, discussion, decisions made. That's required by state law. The city did document the results of the votes, but didn't include all the other requirements of the Sunshine Law. And topics discussed in closed meeting were not limited to the reasons that were cited in the Sunshine Law. If you go into closed session, there are very, very limited reasons you can do that. Usually it relates to sensitive personnel matters. That is allowed to be kept secret. But the Sunshine Law has a strong presumption of openness, that people get to know what's going on. And for example, in the May 13, 2014 meeting, closed meeting, the board discussed personnel issues, but the alleged meeting was for discussing sealed bids. Now you can discuss, in other words, the reason given for closing it was to discuss sealed bids. Well, both of those are reasons to close a meeting, but you can't put the wrong reason and then discuss something else in there, so that's got to be done correctly. So we understand the city is implementing our recommendations to have more rigorous compliance with the Sunshine Law. Budgets and financial statements. This is very common in smaller cities. The city does not properly prepare, approve, or monitor budgets and does not comply with state law in publishing and reporting financial information. Might sound bad, and it is, because there's all kinds of state law requirements on this, and the city was not following basically any of them, but we find out with a lot of cities. They just don't know what the rules are. So we've told you what the rules are, now they've got to be followed. For example, there's 4 funds that the city has. There are no budgets prepared for those. And the budgets that are prepared for the general fund don't include a budget message, a summary, the actual beginning or estimated ending cash balances, the budget amounts for the 2 preceding years, or city indebtedness information, which is required by state law, Section 67 of the revised Missouri Code. None of that information is available. All of it needs to be available in the future. The board also combines the 4 city funds into a consolidated budget that only includes the actual receipts and disbursements for a limited amount at that time. The board also did not approve budgets timely. The annual budget for 2013, 2014 were not approved respectively until mid-February and late March of those years. Again, it needs to be done right at the beginning of the year. It's required to be done at the beginning of the fiscal year. We were concerned about monitoring budget to actual receipts. Once you have a budget, you may have to revise that budget. So you've got to report every month on what's coming in. Is it meeting our budgetary requirements? Are we ahead or are we behind? And that allows you to make intelligent financial decisions. If we're behind, we've got to figure out how to get more revenue. If you're ahead, you may have other things you can do to the city. So sometimes people are actually ahead on budget. A lot of cities this year are experiencing an uptick in revenue, and they need to know how to spend that money, and you can't do it unless there's budget to actual comparisons being made on a monthly basis. We found that the monthly financial statements provided to the board by the county clerk did not include budget to actual information and were not broken down by fund or budgetary line item. That needs to be improved. The board also did not publish the city's financial statements semi-annually as required by state law. I think they were published annually, but they're actually required to be published twice per year. So our recommendations are pretty obvious. Prepare the actual annual budgets, contain all the information required by state law, document the approval of the budget at the beginning of the year, and then ensure budget and actual financial information are monitored on a regular basis and reported to the public in that area. Again, everybody said in the city we're going to do it, and we'll be back in a few weeks to make sure it has been done. Computer controls, finding number 7, controls of the city's computers were not sufficient to prevent unauthorized access. It's kind of a good week to be talking about that. If you look at that whole Sony hacking thing, I mean, if it can happen to Sony, it can happen to Kimmswick, okay? People can hack into your computers for whatever reason, just to cause you trouble, to release information, whatever they might want to do. It's very, very important to prevent unauthorized access to city computers. Keep backup data stored in a secured off-site location. In the case of Kimmswick, there were not adequate password controls, and there was not adequate storage. So we want to make sure that that's done properly going forward. That is a very quick, I speak fast if you haven't noticed. I like to get things through quickly and let people know that we've covered everything. That's basically a summary of what there's a few other things I didn't cover. I don't cover every single thing in the audit, but that's an overall summary. The basic message from this is that we didn't find any criminal activity. We didn't find anybody stealing money, but what we found were loose accounting and control in the city and with the festivals that would create an opportunity for that if things weren't fixed. We believe the city is committed to fixing them, and I have different views on the different cities we audit. Sometimes cities are very resistant. Hey, this is the way we've always done it. We're going to do it that way. We come down pretty hard on cities like that. We did feel, our auditors felt, that people here understood that the problems we raised were legitimate, that they needed to be fixed. We are confident that the city will fix these problems. We are confident that the behind-the-scenes budgetary and accounting effort will be as wonderful as the in-front-of-the-scenes festivals and city that you have. We will come back in 90 to 120 days. I'm the first auditor ever to implement an audit follow-up team. I originally thought when we did the follow-ups, people would hate it when they're coming back. People like it. The auditees want to show that they've improved their cities and their counties and their school districts. They want us to come back. And we're very hopeful that when we come back in 90 days, we'll be able to give the city a completely clean bill of health. That's usually what happens. People understand they need to improve. They're committed to improving. Everybody loves their city, but we don't take their word for it. We will come back and make sure, for those of you who were involved in the petition, we will make sure that all of these recommendations have been implemented, and we will issue a written follow-up report so that you can see if those recommendations have been implemented. We'll come back in 90 to 120 days. It takes us a little time then to collate the data and issue it. I'm not sure when the follow-up report will be issued, but in a few months we'll issue a follow-up report. And hopefully I'll be able to come to the Strawberry Festival next year or the Apple Butter Festival, and I'll be able to say, not only is it fun outside, but everything's being done right inside. It's an honor to serve as your state auditor. Thank you for having me here tonight. Thank you for bringing these issues to our attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.